Hey there. Ready to dive into something really fascinating? We're tackling usage-based linguistics today.
It really is fascinating stuff.
I gotta admit, when I hear linguistics, I don't usually think thrilling, but you're saying it's exciting.
Think of it this way. Usage-based linguistics, we call it UBL for short, it's kind of like detective work, but for language.
Okay, I like where this is going. So no more like dusty old grammar books
Exactly.
or those strict rules they make us learn.
UBL tosses those out. It's like, hold on, grammar isn't some fixed thing, handed down from on high.
Right, right.
It's dynamic, it changes, it's alive, and it's constantly being shaped by how we use language every single day.
Okay, so for those of us who, use language every day, what does that actually mean?
It means our brains are incredible. Like, they're these language supercomputers, always collecting data, from every conversation.
Oh, wow.
Every book, everything we see on TV, all of it.
So it's building like a language map in our heads.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And like any good map, this one helps us navigate new linguistic territory.
Yeah.
We're not memorizing rules, we're seeing patterns, making connections, all based on how people actually talk,
Yeah.
In the real world.
That's so interesting.
And one of the coolest things, it explains stuff we don't even realize we're doing, like how we break down words. You see unbelievable. You instantly know it's not unbelievable.
That's true. I've never even thought about it.
Exactly. UBL would say, that's because you've seen a million times. Unreadable, unforgettable.
Right.
Your brain's like, got it. That's a pattern. No need for some rule memorized from a textbook.
So it's about, what, frequency? Like the more we hear something, the more it sticks.
You got it. And not just words, but whole phrases, how we structure sentences. We call those constructions. Simple ones like drive someone crazy or make your way.
But those constructions, that kind of messes with the idea that meaning is only in the individual words.
Right. UBL's saying meaning's tied to how we actually use language. The context, subtle stuff, even your tone of voice, the culture.
Yeah.
It's way more than just a dictionary definition.
So it's like, hey, there's more to language than just the words themselves. It's what we really mean, not just what we say. Which, isn't that communication in a nutshell?
Precisely. UBL makes us look beyond just the surface. It's about human experience, the richness of it, and how that shapes everything about how we use and understand language.
Okay, so frequency is key. We've got that. But then how does that play into how language changes over time? We know languages evolve, but how does that work through UBL's lens?
That's a great question, and it leads us to what we call grammaticalization, one of the coolest parts of UBL. Think of a forest path, you walk it enough.
You wear down a trail.
Exactly. And in language, those well-worn paths are what we use most often. They get so common, they can actually change into something new.
Wait, so you're saying just by using words or phrases a ton, we can actually make them, like, grammatically different?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And the best part, it's happening all around us. Even something like the future tense in English. Did you know that evolved from going to?
You're kidding. Going to, like, I'm going to the store? That's now how we talk about the future.
You got it. It started as movement, right? Intention. But we used it so much for future plans, it basically morphed into the future tense marker.
Pretty wild, right?
Mind-blowing. So it's not about languages getting simpler over time. It's like they adapt to how we actually talk. But hold on, language is more than just words on a page. Right. It's our experiences, our environment, our body language. How does UBL factor all that in?
You're absolutely right. Language doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of us, from our physical bodies to how we interact with others.
And this is where it gets really cool, right?
You could say that. Ever heard of the 4 E's of cognitive linguistics? The 4 E's. That sounds intriguing. I'm all ears. Tell me everything.
So the 4 E's, they stand for embodiment, embeddedness, and activism, and extended mind.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is a bit, haha. But basically, they get across this idea, right, that language is woven into us. Not just our brains, but like our bodies, where we are, who we're talking to. All that shapes how we use and understand language.
So it's this dance between what's in our heads and what's going on around us.
Exactly. It's not just something from a textbook. It's like how we live.
Yeah.
And UBL gives us this awesome way to think about how it all works. But UBL also makes us question stuff we thought we knew about language.
Oh, I like that. What assumptions are we talking about?
Let's take phonemes, those sounds, the building blocks of language.
Right, like the T sound and top, stuff like that.
Yeah. For ages, people said those are the fundamental units of speech. But UBL comes along and it's like, what if that's just because that's how we've always looked at it?
Right.
Like people thought the earth was flat for centuries, right?
Right. Until somebody was brave enough to be like, I don't think so.
Exactly. questioning what we think is true. So if it's not all about these perfect foams, what does UBL say? Well, there's this thing called exemplar theory. Remember those exemplars we talked about, the snapshots of language our brains store?
Oh, yeah, like little souvenirs from every conversation.
Exemplar theory says we don't just store, like, an ideal T sound. We remember every T we hear with all its little variations.
Wait, so like every T sound from every person I've ever talked to?
You got it. And that might seem like a ton of info, but our brains are amazing. They can handle it. And this explains how we get by, even though people talk so differently. The T in top is different from the T in stop or butter, but we still hear T.
That is so true. I never even noticed that before.
We don't just learn one perfect T and ignore the rest. It's like we remember them all, and that makes us super flexible when we listen to speech.
That is wild. Okay, but in real life, what does this mean? If we know about exemplar theory, so what?
Well, for one, it makes us rethink those building blocks. If it's not just phones, but this whole range of sounds, that changes how we think about, like, how babies learn language or even speech recognition tech.
Like upgrading from a blurry picture to high def, we're seeing details we couldn't before. So UBL isn't just describing language, it's changing how we understand it at its core. This is amazing.
Right. And this is just scratching the surface. UBL impacts how we teach, how we learn, even how we treat language disorders.
No, that's what I'm talking about. Practical stuff. Tell me more about that.
Well, think about language teaching. UBL is all about real-world use, right? So instead of just grammar drills, you immerse students in actual language.
So more conversations, less memorizing verb tables.
You got it. Create situations where they're hearing and using the language naturally.
That makes so much sense.
And it's not just teaching. This is huge in speech therapy, too.
Makes sense. If our brains are always building those language maps, therapists could use that to help people relearn or improve how they communicate, right?
Exactly. By understanding how the brain works, we can create therapies that are way more effective for those who need it.
That's incredible. So UBL is helping us teach better, learn better, even heal. It's not just some abstract theory, it's actually making a difference.
Absolutely. And it goes even further. UBL is now a big deal in the world of artificial intelligence, too.
Whoa, now that's interesting. AI, how does that fit in?
Well, if we want AI that can really get language, not just string words together, but understand jokes, understand what we mean, we got to move past just rules. We got to look at how language actually emerges, how we use it, all those messy real-world interactions.
Makes sense to me. So we're talking teaching, learning, therapy, AI. UBL is everywhere.
It really is. Bridging the gap between the big ideas and actually using them, it's a really exciting field to be a part of.
I bet. And for our listeners, if you're like, I need to know more, we'll have extra resources in the show notes.
For sure, a ton of great stuff out there if you want to go deeper.
But before we wrap up, gotta give our listeners those key takeaways. They're all about efficiency, right? What's the need to know info here?
Totally. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Well, number one, UBL gives you a new way to think about language. Not just rules, but a system, always changing based on how we use it.
Like a brain upgrade. You understand language on a whole other level.
Love that analogy. And with that upgrade, you start noticing things, connections you didn't see before. And you realize, even your own way of speaking, it's part of something much bigger.
It's empowering, right? We're not just along for the ride. We're shaping language as we use it.
Exactly. And that brings up a really interesting question, something to think about. If language is so tied to how we experience the world, how does that change how we see the relationship between language and thought?
Ooh, that is deep. Does language create our thoughts, or do our thoughts create language?
Right, a real chicken and egg situation.
I like it.
And UBL might not have all the answers, but it gives us some tools to explore that connection. But that's a whole other deep dive.
That question's really got me thinking. Language shapes thought, or thought shapes language. So cool to think about.
It's one of those big ones, right? Like, what does it even mean to be human?
Right.
And you're right, UBL doesn't give a simple answer, but it shows us just how connected language and thought really are.
So where would UBL even start trying to figure that out?
Well, remember those 4 E's, all that stuff about embodiment, the environment? They're a big clue. They show that language isn't separate from us. It comes from our experiences. And our thoughts do too, so
yeah,
there's got to be this back and forth between them.
Like a loop. What we do shapes how we think, which changes how we talk, which then changes how we see those same experiences all over again.
Exactly. It's not that language just expresses thought. It's more like language is part of how we think. It shapes how we see things, how we make sense of stuff, even how we understand who we are.
Wow, that is huge. It's like, okay, imagine a painting. The way the artist uses their brushstrokes, it doesn't just show us the scene, it makes us feel something about it. Language is kind of like that, right?
Perfectly put. And what's really cool is if our thinking changes our language,
Yeah.
well, then by studying how people talk, we can learn about how they think too.
It's like a secret code. We could figure out people's biases, what they believe in, even whole cultures, just by listening really carefully to how they use language. That could be so useful.
Absolutely. Imagine analyzing, like, political speeches or what people post online. UBL can help us understand how they use language to try and change our minds.
So we could use it to communicate better in all kinds of areas. Business, marketing, even between countries. It's not just about the words, it's the why behind them. This has been incredible. UBL isn't just something you study, it's a whole new way of looking at language, you know?
Totally. And the best part is it's not over. New discoveries all the time, new ways to use it.
Just like that loop we were talking about, the more we learn about language, the more we learn about ourselves, and that just leads to even more questions.
Exactly. Language is alive. It's always changing, just like us.
And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the amazing world of usage-based linguistics. It's been a wild ride.
It has. But hey, the thinking doesn't stop here. So, until next time, keep those questions coming, and most importantly, keep listening.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's a wrap on today's episode, folks. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.